Okay, we'd like to welcome today one of our favorite veterinarians. She's been an exotic veterinarian for over 24 years, Dr. Cyndi Brown. She practices in the Connecticut and greater New York area. And I just love that she's picked this topic because I think there's so much undiscovered value when it comes to mushrooms that I know me and my birds have already benefited from her in-depth research in this area. So I hope that you will take something away that benefits life in your home for your birds as well. So thank you, Dr. Brown, for being here. And just a reminder to put generic questions in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many of them at the end as we can. And we'll turn it over to you and go off video. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thanks for having me. So we're going to talk about mushrooms today and how they can be used for medicinal purposes for our pets, in particular our pet birds, but I'll touch on other species here and there too, including humans. So welcome. First, we're going to have, just go over an introduction, which is going through translational medicine, and then a brief history.
We seem to have lost your audio. I think your mute button is on.
There we go. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So we're going to just go through the outline that I have here on the screen for you, and we'll get to products and applications at the end. So what brought me to this topic are a couple of different things. One is I really like translational medicine, and translational medicine is where you take, basic medicine and the science principles, and then you apply them to medical practice. And the other is like the One Health perspective, which you've probably heard a lot about lately, but it's an integrated and holistic approach where you balance the health of people, animals, and ecosystems all together at the same time. So you're not just looking at each one individually, you're looking at how one affects the other as well. And that's where this kind of comes from for me. And with the history of mushrooms, they have been used throughout history, consumed since the earliest recorded history. And then you remember ancient Greeks believed that mushrooms provided strength to warriors, and then Romans perceived them as food for the gods, and Chinese treasured them as a health food and an elixir of life. So all of those things, have kept them around for centuries, and they've been used for medicinal purposes for a long time. But then you get to the Western world, which is us, and we always want a lot more data and studies and things like that behind them in order to prove that they do what we say they're going to do. So when we talk about mushrooms, they're really a fungus, and there are 5 fungal phyla, and they're all differentiated based on their reproductive features. The first one is Chytridomycota, and that is a zoosporic fungi. There's also algae that fall into that category, but the one that really is significant in terms of pets and ecology is that it significantly affects amphibians. And so, if I'm working and I'm seeing a pet frog or a pet lizard, they can have a really bad Chytridomycota infection, which can be really difficult to clear. So that's where it resonates familiarity with me. And then the Zygomycota, that falls into the category where Rhizopus is. And Rhizopus, I think everybody remembers at one point or another having some black mold on their bread. And that's kind of where that one is. Another one in that category is mucormycosis, and mucormycosis is a disease that is present here in the US, but we really do not have the capabilities to diagnose it. We don't have tests for it. I had a case when I was a resident of an African gray that presented for a non-weight-bearing lameness, and it was a young bird. And the first thing you think of when that happens is a fracture, but there was no fracture. And then quickly by the next day, the other leg also became completely paralyzed and unusable, and the bird quickly died. And then we happened to do a necropsy on it, and we have a great pathology department at the Animal Medical Center, and we looked really diligently to try to figure out what this was, and there were just mats of fungal organisms, but they didn't show up and classify as Asper. So we kept trying to dive deep and find out what it was, and ultimately we had to actually send the samples out of the US to have them tested, and it came back as a mucormycosis. So they're around, and they are problematic, but we just don't see it written as a diagnosis very often. The next phyla is really important, and that's the glomerular mycota. And the reason that it's really important is because these are the arbuscular mycorrhizae. So that's the whole network that's under the ground with all of the plants and trees. And they refer to it as the arbuscular mycorrhizae, the AM, and those roots are incorporated in over 2/3 of all plant species. So really just a huge network of importance for ecosystems. The next phyla is Ascomycota. And the reason that that one is important to us as bird people is because this is where aspergillosis falls in. And trichophyton, which is a ringworm, and microsporum, those are also important in terms of pet species, ringworm and things like that. And then probably the most household familiar Ascomycota would be Saccharomyces, which is baking yeast. But the aspergillosis is important because that's what we see a lot of our African gray parrots and other species coming down with. And I had written up above under the mucormycosis that it has the absence of galactomannan. And where that becomes important is that the testing that we do for aspergillosis in parrots, most of us send our samples to the University of Miami, where Carolyn Cray's lab does a panel of three different tests, and one of them is a galactomannan assay, and that's something that's commonly used in humans also to diagnose aspergillosis. But the point was that when we are looking for mucormycosis, it does not have galactomannan, so it would not show up on one of those tests. Then to the last but certainly not least category, which is the Basidiomycota. These are the ones that have elaborate fruiting bodies. And these are the club fungi, rusts, stinkhorns, and mushrooms. And mushrooms are what we're really going to talk about today. One of the interesting features is the Amanita phalloides. That's the death cap mushroom. That's one that is present in North America. And if rabbits eat it, they are actually fine. They can eat them because they have a digestive enzyme that breaks down the toxins before that enters their bloodstream, so it doesn't affect them at all. But if humans ingest them, it causes really severe liver poisoning. And this is an article caption for National Geographic, and they did an article on the death cap mushrooms and how they're becoming more invasive and thriving in North America. And it can be really difficult to distinguish an edible mushroom from the death cap mushroom. So we'll talk a little bit about the anatomy of the mushroom. What we usually see is what's above ground, and that consists of the bottom of it, which is the vulva, and that's leftover membrane from the little spore that it starts as. Under the ground is all the mycelium, that's the network. And then there's the stem. Within the stem, there's hyphae. There's also hyphae in the cap. And then the cap contains the gills, and the gills are where the spores are released from. And then sometimes you'll see them with a ring, and that's another remnant of a partial veil. And now we'll talk about what that means, the veil part. When you have mushrooms, they start out as just a little button stage, and as it continues to grow, the outer covering off of that begins to peel away. And when you have a universal veil, that is where, as it starts to grow, you keep a stage of it at the bottom, which ends up being the vulva. And then as the top continues to grow, little pieces and remnants remain, and those become little fragments on the mushroom cap itself. And then there's another one called a partial veil, and that's where, as it grows, you've got the covering over the top of the mushroom, over the cap, and then also down below it. And as it matures further, that retracts, and you end up having just a portion of it left on the stem, which is often called an annulus or ring. And this is it from inception. You've got like your little button stage here. It starts to grow. The velum is the cap, the vulva is the bottom. And then as it starts to grow more, you end up with little remnants on the velum. Here is the stipe that we talk, the stipe, which is the stem, and here is the remnant on the stem. And the reason that these are really important is because they allow people to identify properly the type of mushroom. Now, when we see them, that's all we see, right, as the mushroom, and you think that that's the plant. Well, they actually aren't even really plants. They're a type of fungus, and they have plant-like form with the stem and the cap, and they do have cell walls, but they're really just the flower or the fruit of the mushroom plant. And so, although I've just said it's not really a plant, it's a fungus. So think of it like an apple tree, right? You have an apple tree and you get your blossoms that happen first, and then those go on to become apples, and then the apples have the seeds in them, which are the reproductive portion of the tree. And that's exactly what mushrooms are like. They're really just the flower or fruit of the mushroom. So the roots are more tentacle-like. They go underground, they spread all over the place. They're used to absorb water and nutrients. And that really consists of the main body, and it's called the mycelium, and it's just made up of thousands and thousands of strands of individual hyphae. One thing about mushrooms is they do not have any chlorophyll, and they can't use the sun's energy to photosynthesize like trees and plants do. And that's where we'll start to learn about the synergy that exists in the world. So the life cycle of the mushroom is that you start out with your mycelium underground, and then it starts to form into more of a primordium, which is a more organized constellation. And from there, it ends up going into these little fruiting bodies, which are the little dark spots that you see. And those end up turning into the bulb. And then as it grows, you'll see the actual mushroom that we see when we look on the grass and outside or on trees, and that is the reproductive structure. The spores are produced by the gills, and then they're released. Those spores go into the environment. Mushrooms reproduce by what's considered a sexual cycle. So you have a mating type A and a mating type B that end up getting together as hyphae, and then those start to grow a mated hyphae pair. And then that goes on to become mycelium again. The molds, or the Ascomycotes line, those are all considered asexual development, so it's different than the mushrooms. Now, both of those two, the Ascomycetes and the Basidiomycetes, are the two major phylum in the kingdom fungi, and both of them do reproduce by spores. The Ascomycetes is the largest, and it has about 44,000 species, and Basidiomycetes has about 25,000. And they're both found growing all over dead and decaying matter. And they're the key decomposers of the earth. But the thing that these have in common is that they both have a lot of medicinal properties. And when you think of Ascomycetes, which is the mold category, you think of penicillin, right? That's where penicillin comes from, is from mold. And that's a very valuable antibiotic for the world. Nowadays, it's, a lot of the organisms are becoming more resistant to it, but it served a very important purpose for hundreds and hundreds of years. Now, a typical fungus consists of this mass of branched and tubular filaments that are underground, and that's what I said is called the mycelium. And the big body of it ends up being called an undifferentiated body. And this is really a very metabolically active part of the organism, and it's the longest lived structure. The little mushroom that we see doesn't live for very long. And it has a lot of novel compounds that are beneficial to human health as well as to the health of the plant. And their applications to health for people and the planet are really just enormous. And you can, when you read about them, you'll read that, without mycelium, all ecosystems would fail. Like, that's how very important they are. Now, there's a German forester called Peter Wollenben, and he sort of coined the term wood wide web. because he started studying the mycelium in the forest, and the mycelium grow and comprise this network. And the network actually connects all the individual plants together. And with this, they transfer water, nitrogen, carbon, and other minerals amongst themselves. And it's through this network that trees actually communicate. And these findings suggest that they have a really complex symbiotic relationship for survival. It's between other trees, other plants, and within the mushrooms. And the network is really the integral part of this connectivity. And while the fungi are often acting in their own best interests, they also facilitate health and survival of even the biggest trees that you see. This is a really interesting article that National Geographic put out, and it really just draws all the lines of connection between everything I just talked about. I mean, basically, you will have really large trees in the forest, the oldest ones, and they're often referred to as hub trees. And the oldest ones have excess production, right? They make more than they actually need, and they're the tallest trees, so they reach the top of the canopy, and they have the most ability to have photosynthesis and more access to the sun. So they produce more sugar through the photosynthesis than they need. And then that's shared among others. And they have shown that they will preferentially share to their own offspring. And then after that, they will share to even other tree species, other plants, and the mushrooms really take benefit here because the mass of fungal threads that are under the ground envelop the roots of these hub trees, and they share nutrients in the soil. And then the weaker firs that are shaded in the understory of the forest benefit from it because they don't get the full sun, and then the nutrients are also shared with them. One of the things that it does too is it sends out like warning signals. So, in a situation where there's, I don't know, gypsy moths or some type of a parasite that's starting to affect the trees, when that parasite starts to affect the trees or that insect, the tree will send signals down through the network and it will reach other trees. And then the other trees have the opportunity to start producing things that make them less favorable to the insects or the parasites, like terpenoids that taste bad, or alkaloids that, if a insect was to start to chew on the leaf, it wouldn't taste as good. And they've done studies that have shown that these really big hub trees are so important because if you take out one hub tree, like say someone goes in to, harvest trees in this forest and they take down a couple of the big hub trees because everybody wants the biggest piece of wood, those are the most important ones in the whole network. And you can collapse the whole network by doing that, much more so than if you were just to randomly take like 47% of the trees out of the network. So that's where it's really, really cool to see how everything is so interconnected. Now, mushrooms, we love them. We use them because they make really aesthetically pleasing dishes when we cook. It's also a really popular food because they're low in calories, they're low in carbohydrates and fats, they don't have a lot of sodium in them, and they provide a lot of important nutrients like selenium and potassium and riboflavin, niacin, vitamins, amino acids, proteins. They even have a lot of fiber. So they're pretty amazing. And they're important for their healing capacities also, which are properties that have been shown in traditional medicine for years. There's about 25 species widely accepted for food around the world. There's a few of them that are commercially cultivated, and there's no easy distinction between edible and medicinal mushrooms. But many of the common edible species have therapeutic properties, and several of them are used for medicinal purposes that are also edible. But the thing that they all have in common is that they have the mushroom mycelium and the fruit bodies that are really important for immune modulation and immune support. Some of the studies have shown that they can significantly reduce the likelihood of cancer invasion and metastasis or spread. They can be antibacterial, cholesterol lowering, immune system enhancing, and a source of bioactive compounds, and many, many more things. And we're going to get into those and discuss them. But some of the things that you need to take into consideration is that the growth characteristics, stage, and the post-harvest condition, like what happens to that mushroom after it's harvested, all influence the chemical composition and its nutritional value. And there's a lot of variations that occur both among the same mushrooms and within different species. So the content and type of biologically active substances will vary considerably. And the concentration of these substances are affected in different strains, like depending on what substrate it grows in, how it's cultivated, which developmental stage you're harvesting, the age of the mushroom, the storage conditions, how it's actually prepared or cooked or processed. All those things play an important role in what it can actually deliver to us in the end. So some of the really important things that are inside mushrooms, I touched on it a few minutes ago, but a lot of proteins, and I listed a bunch of them there. They're a low calorie food due to their low amounts of fat. They contain high amounts of ash, and you hear nowadays about magnesium and how so many people are low in magnesium. Well, they contain a really good amount of magnesium, potassium, phosphorus, calcium, iron, zinc. So they're a good mineral source. They also contain glucose and mannitol and trehalose. And you don't think about a mushroom, you don't think about biting into it and going, oh, that's sweet, because they're not sweet, but those are the abundant sugars that are in them. And they have fructose and sucrose to a much, much lower level. They contain a lot of important vitamins, but vitamin B2 isn't a really important one. And they're the only non-animal food source that contains vitamin D. But if you remember, we talked about the fact that a lot of them are in the ground of the forest, right? So they're not photosynthesizing, they're not getting the sunlight. And yet the wild mushrooms are an excellent source of vitamin D2, and that's because of the interaction that they have with the trees, and sharing the resources there. Whereas cultivated mushrooms that are grown in darkness really don't have access to any UVB, so they do not contain as much vitamin D as wild mushrooms do. That's where everyone's like, oh, wild mushrooms are better. And that would be one of the reasons why. Carbohydrates are found in high proportions, but they're healthy carbohydrates. And the mushrooms also contain a lot of fiber, beta-glucans, hemicelluloses, and pectins, and those are all really healthy, important things as well. There's more than 100 medicinal functions that are produced by mushrooms and fungi, and this is just a big list, but all of these things, you're like, God, we would all benefit from all of these, so you want them all. So eat lots of mushrooms. One of the really cool things that I learned through all this research is how they're using mushrooms now to reverse multi-drug resistance in cancer cells. Just like in bacteria, after we use antibiotics for prolonged periods of time, the bacteria change and begin to develop resistance against the antibiotics, and then you have to switch and use a different antibiotic. Well, the same thing happens with these anti-cancer drugs. They can actually become resistant to the drugs that are being used. But one way that these cancer researchers have found to counteract that is that the mushrooms can be used to go in and alter the way that the drugs get into the cells. And the particular types of cancer that this has been shown to be most effective in are going to be gastric carcinoma, prostatic cancer, bladder cancer, lung cancer, liver cancer, breast cancer. But those are really big ones that affect so many of the people that we know and love. And research has also concluded that eating mushrooms as part of your daily diet can be effective in prevention and treatment of several chronic diseases. So, we talked about penicillin, but when you think about it, these mushrooms can be an alternative source of new antimicrobials for us, and a natural form, right? Not a synthetic form. And in this age of multi-drug resistant bacteria, that's really important because we need to be able to come up with other things that can help people that become sick or animals that become sick and that they have organisms that the antibiotics aren't working on. And now in the world, and this goes into One Health as well as, veterinary medicine, is the age of what we call responsible antimicrobial stewardship. So instead of every time somebody calls you and they have an animal that's sneezing and they just want an antibiotic, we're really taught and trained not to do that, because there have been studies that have shown that, if it's a virus, you're not going to need an antibiotic. And if you use an antibiotic, then you're increasing the likelihood that organisms can become resistant to it. And also looking at the fact that humans stand at a higher priority level than animals. And that's a big ethical dilemma, but trying to reserve the antibiotics for humans and not using them across the board in animals just because we have them available and they're on the market, but trying to reserve some of that for the really serious cases of infection that require them. So many molecules are made by the fungi and are known to be bioactive. And these bioactive compounds are found in all parts of the mushroom. So the fruit bodies, the mycelium, and also in cultured broths of the mycelium. And the compounds are broken into primary and secondary metabolites. And we're going to start talking about the primary metabolites first. The primary metabolite that is of most significance is polysaccharides, and it's most important in the modern medicine where they're trying to use things for cancer research. They have anti-tumor action by activation of the immune response of the host organism. They don't directly kill the tumor cells, but they enable the medications to get inside of the cells, and that's critical. Think of like Trojan horses. And polysaccharides also prevent stress on the body. And there have been mouse studies that have demonstrated a 50% reduction in tumor size and prolonged survival rate of tumors that have, of mice that have tumors. So I think all of that sounds really promising, and I'm hopeful to see where this can go in the future. Another one of the primary metabolites is beta-glucans, and this is really important. And they're responsible for anti-cancer activity as well as moderating the immune system. They have a really big neuroprotective effect, and they're immune stimulators. And they have the capacity to treat several different diseases, which has been demonstrated by studies. Beta-glucans are not synthesized by humans, and they are notably beneficial to humans, and they have been shown to really stimulate the immune system in humans. But in some animal studies that has been shown, but I can't tell you that that has been the case with birds. Nonetheless, I choose to extrapolate and try it. And in my trying to use them over the years, I do feel like I've had a pretty significant response in animals that have been on treatment for a particular disease for a long period of time. And then I add in mushrooms to try to immune stimulate and boost them. And I feel like I have a better chance of getting infections cleared up when I do that. They do protect from pathogenic bacteria. They protect from harmful effects in the environment with toxins and carcinogens. And they protect from infectious diseases as well, the beta-glucans. And they've even shown that they help improve and aid the recovery of chemotherapy patients after chemotherapy and radiation. And so I think that's really important as well. The secondary metabolites are also very important, and they clearly provide most of the therapeutic activity of the medicinal plants and fungi. But they do things that are not necessarily needed for their day-to-day function, these secondary metabolites, but they exert a wider range of effects on the plant itself and other living organisms. And they provide benefits to plants and fungi. They often will inhibit competing plants, and that's where the terpenoids come in. We'll talk about those in a minute. They ward off herbivores and insect pests by increasing the alkaloid content, so it'll make the leaves or the things taste more bitter. They function as cellular signaling molecules, and they also act as pollinators in attracting them and dispersing seeds. So they have a lot of really good secondary metabolites. And on the left, there's examples of a lot of the different ones, and there's more than that even, but I'm going to focus mainly on the ones on the focus group that says steroids, anthraquinones, benzoic acid derivatives, and terpenoids. That should be an E, not an I. So fungal terpenoids are of the greatest interest because of their biological activities as antitoxins, antimicrobials, anti-tumor, cytotoxic, meaning they can kill cells, and anti-inflammatory properties. And most of the terpenoids of pharmaceutical interest have been identified in the Basidiomycetes family, and so that's the mushroom family. They're the largest group of natural products and secondary metabolites produced by living things. There's more than 25,000 terpenoids reported, and they can do things anywhere from electron transport, signal transduction, cell membrane function, chemical defense against predators, and also in establishing symbiotic relationships. And I've just included on this slide and the next couple slides some of the examples of essential oils, because these are aromatic compounds that are found in plants, and they're responsible for each plant's unique fragrance, and they're found in essential oils. They're produced predominantly by plants, particularly the conifers or the pine family and citrus trees. A lot of people associate them with cannabis because the cannabis plants contain high levels of terpenoids. They're known to be very bioactive, which means they affect the body. And due to the really vibrant smells, they form the basis of essential oils and are also an integral part of aromatherapy. And like, think about when people are like, oh, you want to be calm, you need to like have some lavender essential oils around, or lavender lotion, or burn a lavender candle, things like that. Additional benefits that the terpenes have is they have cleansing and cosmetic benefits. Some are used to alleviate pain, provide stress relief, improve appetite, elevate mood. There's a lot of different things, including antifungal properties. And so you can think of these as, natural compounds that can really boost your health in many ways. The second secondary metabolite we're going to talk about is sterols, and ergosterol metabolites are the main sterol in fungi, and they're involved with regulation of cell membranes, which is hugely important, and structure, as well as forming immunological functions. They're important to survive and protect themselves from infections. They create compounds that are beneficial to humans, even though they use them themselves for their purposes. What they create also helps us, and they occupy a very important place here. Ergosterol can be converted into vitamin D2 under ultraviolet radiation. Oops, didn't mean to change that. And when we continue with ergosterol, it's a white crystalline organic solid molecule, big deal to most of us, right? But it's important that it's found only in fungi. So Saccharomyces, like the cooking yeast, and Claviceps purpura, which is the cause of ergot, which is a fungus that's found on cereal grasses and grains. And that should be important to us as bird owners, because when you look at a lot of the seed diets that are harvested, that is a type of fungus that will often occur on them. And if the birds eat the seeds that have this ergot fungus on it, they can end up with insults to their liver and other organ systems that can make them sick and cause other problems. And ergosterol is chemically related to cholesterol. So when you look at its little chemical formula, it looks very similar because they're related. So a really important anti-inflammatory effect of the ergosterol is why it's used so much. It suppresses the production of tumor necrosing factor alpha, and that's an inflammatory cytokine. And I don't know if all of you know what cytokines are, but they're small proteins that are really important in controlling the growth and activity of other immune system cells and blood cells. And when they get released, they signal the immune system to do its job, and they can affect the growth of blood cells and other cells that help the body's immune system and inflammation. So the protein is important for resistance to infection, to cancers. And there's a balance that needs to be struck between how much tumor necrosing factor is present and how much isn't present. But the tumor necrosing factor alpha actually signals for cancerous cells to die, and that is where it's really useful. Other anti-inflammatory effects of the ergosterol is that it inhibits lipopolysaccharide-induced inflammation, and that's the major component of gram-negative bacterial cell walls. And in birds, gram-negative bacteria are like the enemy, right? Gram-negative bacteria are abnormal in our parrots, and we shouldn't see them. And if they're present, they're usually causing disease and end up causing acute inflammatory responses, and they cause release of a lot of cytokines that create problems for the patient because they're not feeling well because of all this inflammation. It's widely recognized as a really potent activator of monocytes and macrophages, and those are part of our immune system that will go in and envelop invading agents and bacteria and engulf them and eat them. So the anti-inflammatory effect of ergosterol extends to the effects that it has on the degranulation of bone marrow derived mast cells. Mast cells develop in the bone marrow. They're a type of white blood cell, and they're called a granulocyte because they have a lot of granules in them, and they are released during infections, allergic reactions, asthma, things like that. Some of the granules are histamines and heparin. So when you think about when you have a cold, you're taking an antihistamine because you're trying to decrease the inflammation that's caused by that histamine release. And the mast cells have the capacity to release all kinds of pro-inflammatory mediators. And what this ergosterol or sterol from the mushrooms is doing is it's inhibiting this degranulation effect. So trying to keep the inflammation to a minimum and yet let the body do its job to fight infection. Another anti-inflammatory effect that it has is it suppresses the expression of cyclooxygenase 2. There's a lot of what we refer to as NSAIDs, right? Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And you'll hear them talked about as a COX-1 or a COX-2. And that has to do with where they are having their effects of prostaglandin. Sorry. And it's a key enzyme that's required to convert arachidonic acid to prostaglandins. And the synthesis is stimulated in response to situations like inflammation, pain, and cancer. And it primarily has its power on the gastric mucosa. So that's why we have to be careful with all these non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs that they don't cause problems with our stomach and our stomach lining and gastric acid secretion. Sorry, I'm going to have to use a Bricola to keep myself from coughing. And the COX-2 enzyme is really capable of being formed and activated and expressed at sites of inflammation and cancer. So other anti-inflammatory effects of the ergosterol, and I don't want to lose you all in this because it's just like a lot of names and words, but it's called nuclear factor erythroid 2 related factor. We just call it NRF2. And it regulates the cell's defense against toxins and oxidation. So it's really important in drug detoxification. It's also important to resist chemical carcinogens and inflammatory challenges. And carcinogens are the things that increase your risk to developing cancer. And activation of this NRF2 by the ergosterol enhances heart muscle cell resistance to stress and myocardial injury. And it also interferes with osteoarthritis by activating the mechanism of the NRF2 pathway in chondrocytes. And chondrocytes are the specialized cells that produce and maintain the extracellular matrix of cartilage. And it's when that cartilage breaks down that you end up having arthritis. So in here, I have a couple of little tiny pictures. One is of the NRF2 modulator, and I put quercetin below it because quercetin is one of those. And quercetin is used, I use it as an anti-inflammatory in patients that have respiratory inflammation and respiratory conditions. So allergies or even just being hypersensitized because they've recently had an infection or something in their respiratory tract. And then down the bottom, you'll see one that's called NRF2 detox, and that contains sulforaphane. Glucopyranin is found in cruciferous vegetables. So your cruciferous vegetables are like broccoli and bok choy and cauliflower, things like that. And they contain sulforaphane. The glucopyranin, when you start to chew or digest it, breaks down into the sulforaphane. And that is a potent NRF2 inducer. And broccoli sprouts have about 10 to 100 times more sulforaphane in them than mature plants. And this goes back to what I was saying about it depends on the life stage of the plant that you're harvesting, what effects you will get, right? So if you eat a bunch of broccoli sprouts, you're going to get a lot more sulforaphane than if you ate a bunch of mature broccoli. And it's the same with the mushrooms, depending on which part of the mushroom is harvested and at what time, what beneficial effects you'll get from it. So It really has been a prime subject of extensive research involving inflammation, metabolism, and cancer prevention and treatment. And it has really far-reaching functions that I think are going to be valuable, that are valuable now, but I think they're going to become even more valuable. The next secondary metabolite we're going to talk about is anthraquinones. They're an active component of many plant blends, which are used as medicines. So like Senecot or natural senna, that's a laxative, diuretics, estrogenic or hormonal medicines, immune modulatory effects, and some of them even delay renal failure or kidney failure. There's a compound that I listed down below. The important thing is just that it has anthraquinone in it, and it exhibited noteworthy antimicrobial activity against staph infections, Staph aureus and Staph epidermidis, and also against fungal growth for aspergillosis. And so there's two forms of aspergillosis, Aspergillosis flavus and niger, that it's effective against. And so that's where I would consider using the mushrooms, is because they're going to have the anthraquinones, and the anthraquinones are going to help the body fight the fungal infections. So, you know, if I had an African gray patient with Asper, I would try to be using that as part of my protocol for their therapy. Anthraquinones get cleavage of bonding of different bonds, and it yields benzoic acid. And benzoic acid is the oldest and most widely used preservative in foods. It occurs naturally in cranberries, raspberries, plums, prunes, cinnamon, and cloves. And it's primarily used as an antifungal agent in fruit-based and fruit beverages, fruit products, bakery products, and margarine. When you think about like the Twinkie that was sitting on the top of your refrigerator for 6 months and never started to grow mold or anything, that's why. And the most common uses for it are in carbonized beverages, pickles, sauces, and jellies. There's other non-food applications for it that are found in cosmetics as well. Where the benzoic acid becomes important to us is that it has really good implications for mycobacterial treatments, and mycobacterium is TB. And for whatever reason, our Pyonis, our Brotigeris, and in particular blue-fronted Amazon parrots are very susceptible to this, and we see it more commonly in them. It has esters that act as potential prodrugs, and what those do is they facilitate the entry into the bacterium because of its lipid nature, and they're hydrolyzed into amino acids and then work their way in to eliminate the bacteria. And that's huge because this has historically been something that's very difficult to treat. We have multi-drug protocols that we use for it, and even then, a lot of resistance has occurred. So it's not an easy disease to treat. It is a zoonotic disease, meaning it can transfer from human to people to animals. I guess humans are people, but I'm sorry, you got what I mean. And until COVID-19 pandemic, tuberculosis was the leading cause of death from a single infectious agent. It ranked above HIV and AIDS. But the number of cases also actually increased significantly during the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that was because there was a lot more stress and immunosuppression. So this is another thing that I would implement into a treatment protocol if I had a bird that I confirmed and diagnosed with mycobacterium. So now we're going to talk about some of the specific mushrooms. Button mushrooms are the world's most highly cultivated and consumed mushroom. And they have a lot of beneficial effects. They're effective against metabolic syndrome, which is basically a cluster of conditions that increases your risk for heart disease, stroke, and diabetes, which I feel like is that whole cluster, and that metabolic syndrome is something that's very prevalent in the US right now. They're also beneficial for immune function and gastrointestinal health, as well as anti-cancer. And there's a strong evidence for improvement of vitamin D status when you're eating mushrooms. And vitamin D is really important for so many things that's critical. Then we go on to shiitake mushrooms. And these are the most studied mushrooms grown worldwide. Lentinan is a slow tumor growth. And it's a biologic response modifier. It also has antiviral effects and antimicrobial effects, more so on gram-positive, but also on gram-negatives. It protects the liver, lowers cholesterol. It has a lot of B vitamins in it, and it's good for skin and heart health. The next one is the reishi mushrooms. And these really help to adapt to stressors. They help with fatigue reduction, to provide calm and sustained energy. They're good for cardiac health, blood pressure. They improve learning and memory. And they have natural adaptogens that support mental and physical stress. And they also have a mimicked nerve growth factor. So where I would use these is if I have birds that have really high anxiety and high stress, and then those birds that are super stressed end up picking their feathers and stuff, right? So I would incorporate reishi mushrooms into a supplement for birds that are having that. If I had a bird that I've documented with cardiovascular disease and high blood pressure, I would incorporate this into a protocol for them as well. Another place that it could be used is, this isn't as common in every location, but in New York City, we see a lot of birds with lead toxicity because we have a lot of pre-war buildings and there's a lot of lead paint, multiple layers down. And our birds have really strong beaks and they just mow through the wooden windowsill and stuff like that. And they end up being able to get to those deep layers of leaded paint and end up with nerve toxicity or lead toxicity. And part of what that does is demyelinate the nerves. It takes the outer coating off of the nerves. And for them to get back to normal, we need to actually have nerve growth happen. So by providing support for the nervous system, for those nerve cells to regrow, is part of how we can support them to heal. A lot of the older birds or bigger birds, sorry, will have like vomiting and regurgitation. But some of the smaller birds, like parakeets, we typically will see lead toxicity manifested as just they lose use of their hind limbs, of their pelvic limbs. So they can still fly around and they're very alert and active and normal, but they can't stand and they can't use their feet. And so we've got to really support nerve growth back into those legs again to get them back to a point where they can use their legs and function properly, even while we're detoxifying them and removing the actual toxins. Now, lion's mane, this one is a big one. It has really fantastic properties. It helps damaged nerve cells recover, and it increases nerve growth factor. So this also applies to the lead toxicity that I was talking about. And it's also not a bad consideration to use in cases of anxiety. But also in cases where there's inflammation or you have any brain issues. It says it protects against dementia. I also use it in patients that have had strokes. It protects against ulcers in the gastric tract and as well as providing a balanced immune response. But the other really important area that I use this one in is birds that have avian virus, because that is a virus that attacks the nervous system. And so by doing everything we can to support the nervous system, we can help these birds rally their own immune system and health to stay as well as they can for as long as they can. The next one is chaga. And chaga really enhances cognition, memory. It also has anti-tumor effects that have been documented. And it supports DNA anti-mutagenic, so it supports the DNA not changing and becoming problematic. The thing with this one, though, is we do say that to use it with caution if there's any kidney disease. And also pre-operatively, because it has a lot of alkaloids in it, and the alkaloids can cause problems with the kidneys if they are already in crisis or have issues with them. It's typically found in birch trees in really cold climates. And the natural reserves have really been exhausted lately. So they're seeking new development and trying to look for cultivated substitutes in like Siberia and Russia, because that's where it used to be collected from, because their climate is really ideal for this to grow. We do see some of it in North America. Like if you're going through a, forest and you see some birch trees, you could very likely see some chaga growing on it as well. Maitake or hen of the woods is another really useful mushroom. And it's used in diabetes because it increases insulin sensitivity and decreases the body's resistance to insulin. It supports weight management. It's also used in a lot of cancer patients and helps maintain healthy cholesterol levels and stimulate the immune system and helps with blood pressure. Um, with birds that have diabetes, it's really problematic because we just do not have good ways to manage them. The products that are made for humans are too strong. We cannot dilute insulins. They're such fragile molecules that it's really hard to try to dilute it and then also to risk that they're getting too high of a dose and that we really bottom them out and they become so hypoglycemic that we can lose them that way. So I try to use other more natural ways to see if I can intercede and help with cases where patients have diabetes. I pray and hope that none of your birds ever get diabetes because it's really difficult, but it's something that I would consider adding into a protocol. Cordyceps is a really interesting fungi. It's a complex of parasitic fungus that grows on the larva of a particular moth species. It's just kind of gross, but it's used to treat fatigue. It's used for energy support. In particular, it's used for respiratory issues. So in birds that have respiratory disease, this is one that I would reach for to add in. It also has some effects for improving renal function, also anti-tumor and anti-diabetic. So I would incorporate that into one as well. And most of the products that you're going to see have a combination of mushrooms in them. Turkey tail, and I think this is one of the last ones, is a tonic. It's also an immune stimulant. There are some proprietary cancer drugs that have made in Japan out of this, and it's referred to as PLK. There's also another one that's referred to as PSK. And they've really been shown to improve survival rates of patients with gastric and colorectal cancers, as well as esophageal cancer. And they really inhibit or try to keep the organisms from adhering or sticking to other locations, migrating, moving, or invading into other body parts. It's also a very good prebiotic to feed some of the beneficial bacteria and a biological response modifier. Oyster mushrooms, these are ones that you'll see around. They're very rich in magnesium and potassium, and they happen to have a lot of liver protective properties to them. Also good with neuronal differentiation and nerve growth. So again, this is one that I would add in for my patients with lead toxicity or with avian bornavirus. And just a kind of interesting fact, they have 4 to 11 times more carbohydrate in them than other mushrooms do. And then they carry a lot of the other beneficial effects that other mushrooms do as well. Wood ear is another mushroom that you'll find. You see this one a lot dried. So you would buy it like in a bag on a shelf in an Asian market, dried up, and you kind of rehydrate it and use it in cooking. They're edible. They're grown commercially in China. They're very effective at reducing LDL cholesterol, low density lipoprotein cholesterol, and they also have been shown to reduce aortic atherosclerotic plaques. And atherosclerosis is something that we have a lot of in our pet bird industry these days. We've always had it, but we've documented we're aware of it. We do CT scans now. They show up more commonly. We can confirm that they have it. Sometimes even on x-rays, we can see mineralization of the great vessels because of the atherosclerotic plaques that are there. So typically we'll associate this with birds that have been on an all-seed diet or primarily an all-seed diet and not great nutrition or not enough exercise. But we'll also see it in patients that have had an incident of illness in their life that created a considerable amount of inflammation, because that inflammation affects the lining of the blood vessels And then that's where the atherosclerotic plaques start to form. Dr. Pilney did one of his resident projects on a retrospective study where we looked at all of the atherosclerotic plaques that we found in our pathology database at Animal Medical Center, and looked also for chlamydia. So we did PCR for chlamydia in those plaques and found a really significant correlation between chlamydia and the atherosclerotic plaques, just lending again to, if you've had really significant inflammatory disease, some type of an infection that's really caused that much inflammation, you increase your susceptibility to having atherosclerosis. Another way that this is really important is you see my cute little picture of Quakers there. Quaker parrots notoriously have issues with cholesterol, elevated cholesterol, hugely elevated cholesterol. We just do not have them figured out yet in terms of what their ideal diet is and how to keep that from happening. And some of them have issues and others don't. So that's also, we haven't quite figured that out yet. But when they do have issues, it's really significant. And I've tried putting them on cholesterol lowering medications, changing their diet, increasing their exercise, doing so many different things. But this is another tool that I would implement to try to help reduce LDL and also reduce the likelihood of atherosclerotic plaques forming, because that's the next step, right? The cholesterol is what gets in there and irritates the intima, which is the lining of those blood vessels, and that's what then, predisposes to atherosclerosis. So even in people, like that's the thing, like high levels of cholesterol in your diet, and that's why they check your cholesterol all the time. If it's high, you're more likely to have atherosclerosis and heart disease down the road. Mukataki is really abundant in Japan, and that's one of the most delicious edible mushrooms. The use of this actually helps to prevent the development of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So for me, if I have a patient like a rose-breasted cockatoo or a couch potato Amazon that's really overweight and fat, they almost all have fatty liver, and it's really unhealthy for them, including like the really overweight budgies that we see. And so I would consider implementing Mukataki mushroom into a protocol when I have these really obese birds or birds that have been on all seed diets and poor nutrition. So there's many medicinal mushroom options, and you want to use a little bit of caution when selecting them and focus on the quality of the product and the source. And how effective they're going to be is going to depend on what parts of the mushroom are included in the supplement. This is not an industry that's regulated by the FDA. They are indeed considered a supplement, and you cannot really say that they're using these for medicinal purposes. So until more published data gets out and things like that, we still just have to consider them a supplement and not an actual medicine. So now we're going to get into the section where we talk about selecting the mushroom products to use. These are just some of the ones that are available on the market today. I have used a number of these. The traditional Chinese veterinary medical pet supply company is very well known and also has a lot of like Chinese herbal products, as well as they do a lot of acupuncture stuff. So that's a well-known organization that I trust. Animal Essentials also makes a lot of mushroom supplements. VetraScience is another company that I would trust to use their products. And then Real Mushrooms has a pet product line that I have used before as well. Immunity is on the market. It actually has really just one mushroom in it, the Coriolis versicolor, and it's the mycelia that's used. And there was a study that came out from the University of Pennsylvania where they used it as a single agent polysaccharopeptide to delay the spread and improve the survival of patients that had hemangiosarcoma, dogs in particular. And so it has been used in their studies that have shown it's effective. Now, I use this not just for hemangiosarcoma. I use it in cases where I think a bird has cancer, or if I think, if I know, if I've documented it. I've even used it in like rabbits that have, and birds that have just chronic upper respiratory infections I can't get to clear, things like that. I will implement this if it's the easiest thing for me to grab. And the reason I say it like that is because I don't carry any of these mushroom supplements in the hospital, right? Like the human ones. But at AMC, we did have immunity in stock. So I'm more likely to get people to be compliant if I can send them home with it, with instructions, than I am if I ask them to go home and purchase something off of the internet or at a local health food store and use it. So sometimes I have to take that into consideration when I'm deciding what I'm going to use for a patient, even though maybe what I would prefer is a different product. The important thing is for the patient to get a mushroom supplement into them. So the dose for dogs is 100 milligrams per kilogram. I use the same dose for birds. I end up mixing the contents of one of the capsules with 2 mils of distilled water. That makes it into a 50 milligram per ml suspension. And then I just calculate out their dose, extrapolated from human dosages. So a 358 gram Amazon would get 0.7 mLs of the 2 milligram per ml suspension. And then if you want to administer less volume, you can actually make it up to 100 milligrams per ml. And I just want to correct that. You're going to give 0.7 mLs of the 50 milligram per ml suspension, not 2 mg per ml. It shouldn't say that. You can purchase this directly by immunity.com, or you can purchase it on Amazon. It's not inexpensive. These are some other companies. Gaia Herbs. I really like Gaia Herbs for so many different herbs. Thorn is another company that makes a good mushroom medley that has a combination of different mushrooms for overall immune support. Gaia Herbs really primarily sells supplements that contain fruiting bodies. There's this kind of argument among the mushroom professionals, if you will, about the use of the mycelium versus the fruiting bodies. And Gaia Herbs feels that the mycelium is considered more of a filler, and they don't use any of that in their products. So that's one difference that you'll see from them versus other companies. The company that I tend to use the most is Host Defense. I really like their product line. Many of them come in a liquid, either a tincture or a powder or a capsule. So you've got some different options there. And they have, I'm advancing. They do use mycelium, and this is stuff directly off their website about the benefits of mycelium and myceliated brown rice. They use organic brown rice as the base for the mycelium to grow on. And it's very similar to the fermentation process for kombucha and kimchi and things like that, where in the end, the rice isn't rice anymore. It's been metamorphosized into a different structure. But there has been research that has confirmed that beneficial mushroom mycelium and the fermented substrate that it's used to grow it on are both immunologically active, meaning they both have immune benefits, and that they're not considered fillers. And so this is where there's, difference between the group at Gaia and other people that are involved with mushrooms as well as this group. But I feel like the Host Defense Company has a really good website and a lot of really good literature to support what they're doing. And a lot of research goes into it. And I have had good success with their products, so I stick to them. And this is basically, it starts with organic brown rice. They inoculate it with the mycelium, and then the mycelium grows to its peak efficacy. It transforms the brown rice, and then ultimately they process it into a powder that's put into capsules or used as just a powder for a supplement. This is a great chart that I use all the time from Host Defense. So if you're like, my bird has a respiratory problem, what should I use? So you can go to the breathing, and you want something that contains chaga, cordyceps, and reishi. If you've got, a bird that's overweight or potentially diabetic, you want glycemic balance. So you want a supplement that contains the chaga, cordyceps, lion mane, maitake, and reishi, etc. For nerve support, the primary ones are going to be cordyceps, lion's mane, and turkey tail. I'm sorry, reishi. So that's just a really useful guide to have on hand when you're trying to pick out what you want to use. As far as general immune support, not going for anything specific, I use the My Community blend. I use it myself anytime I get sick. I also use it in patients. They also have an elderberry supplement that I use, the mushroom elderberry supplement, when patients are sick, and that one comes in a liquid formulation. So here are the basic 3 formulations: a capsule, the powder, or an extract. How I usually dose it is I base it on an average human body weight. So the average human is 78 kilograms. And then I extrapolate the dose based on the mushroom that provides the desired effect that I'm looking for. So if I have an older Amazon parrot with atherosclerosis and some bacterial enteritis, I really want to focus more on the atherosclerosis. So I'm going to pick reishi mushroom as the top one that I want to focus on, and then I'll calculate my dose based on that one. And again, I'm just reminding you here that with kidney disease, you have to be careful with chaga because it does have a high oxalate content. And if you look on the label, you'll see an order of decreasing amount. The one with the highest amount is listed first. So chaga is in the highest amount of 148 milligrams. So that wouldn't be one you'd want to reach for if your bird has a high uric acid. And then this is just kind of dose determination and formulation, which I'll leave this up as I talk about it. Really, I think it would be better if you had someone help you calculate the dosages if you're not good with math or comfortable or familiar with it. And I would recommend that you have a veterinarian help you anyway with coming up with a formulation for your birds. But, basically based on the reishi, I end up determining what the daily dose is for the bird. And then from that, just do basic algebra and come up with the fact that the bird's dose is 1 milligram. And then I end up mixing 1 capsule with 1 ml of water, and I try to use a distilled water. And then you'll have 110 milligrams per ml. And if you want, 1 milligram, you end up using 0.01 ml of that mixture. And then I prefer to administer it directly into the beak of the patient as opposed to putting it in a food item. I know everyone wants to just put it on something and have them eat it, but then you don't know that they're getting the dose. And this is such a small volume. You really want to make sure that they get it. And I do store the mixture refrigerated and make a new batch every 2 days. That's not based on any science. That's just based on the fact that I don't know how long it would last and still be effective. And I don't want to risk that it's not going to be effective. So yes, that does create waste. What I recommend to a lot of people is that they then just incorporate that into something that they're eating so they don't waste it and they're taking it along with their bird, which 9 out of 10 times is not going to be harmful at all. Well, probably 10 out of 10 times, but. And then the same kind of way that I calculated it, I use for the powder. If I'm looking at, they say how many teaspoons to take per day, I can calculate out the dose from that. And again, making a new batch every 2 days. Now, tinctures are the liquid formulation, and a tincture is an extract of plant or animal material that's dissolved in ethanol. And ethanol is an alcohol. And most tinctures are alcohol-based. There are some water-based tinctures, But really, the alcohol is what removes the good stuff that you want. And it's the only edible solvent that can effectively extract the active ingredients required from these organisms. So the alcohol also, brings the properties into a more concentrated form and preserves it once they remove it. So it's really the ideal way to use it, but we don't really want to be giving our birds alcohol, right? Not only that, but it tastes bitter to them. And so what I usually recommend is that you bring bring some water or broth to a boil. And then you're going to place a single dose of the tincture, like the dose that you would use for the patient, into the cup. Again, just tiny cup. It could be like, I don't know, like a thimble, like a cap of something. And then you're going to just pour a little bit of the hot water that you brought to a boil into that and let it cool. And as it cools, it's going to evaporate the alcohol out of it. But keep in mind that these are phytochemicals, herb chemicals, and that they will decay if they're boiled and cooked. And the goal is not to cook this. The goal is just to have it warm enough that the alcohol will evaporate out of it. And I usually will let it kind of sit till the dose is at room temperature. And the alcohol evaporates, and then I mix it with either like something that would absorb the water that the bird would eat, like oatmeal or couscous. Keep in mind, if you have a really obese bird, this may not be the ideal way for you to deliver it because we don't want to add more weight to them. You can put it on some other form of moist food, like smashing up a really tiny portion of a banana and putting it in with that, and then letting them eat that off of a spoon. You can also use some nut pastes to deliver it as well. So, then we've kind of talked about as I've gone through the whole lecture, but, when would you use a mushroom supplement? When would I use a mushroom supplement? And I tend to use it in birds that have chronic and debilitating illnesses. So we talked about avian virus. I didn't talk about beak and feather disease or polyoma, but those would be cases as well. Chlamydia for sure, mycobacterium or TB. And then cases where a bird has malnutrition, like ones that have been on all seed diets. So, a lot of cases, I'm sure you end up taking into the sanctuary, birds that you're much older. And, many, many years ago, we didn't know as much as we know about nutrition and birds. And some of the people still just feed sunflower seeds that they've fed their whole life. And somehow the birds have miraculously continued to live. But they are in a state of malnutrition. And so if I get those in, I will also support their immune system by adding mushrooms in while we're trying to transition them to a healthier diet. Anytime that a bird has injuries like bites or trauma or open fractures, I will incorporate mushrooms into it, just the basic immune supportive ones. Stress or anxiety, we talked about that. Routine bacterial or yeast infections, I'll even use them for that, but just shorter periods of time. And I also use it in birds that when illness occurs, they're susceptible to other diseases. So we talked about how, Protogerus and Pyonis and Poicephalus and African grays are more susceptible to either Asper or Mycobacterium. So those would be birds that if I know that they have another illness, they come in with, I don't know, a broken leg. They come in with a tumor on their wing that I'm removing, anything like that, I would supplement them to try to support their immune system so that they're not as susceptible to coming down with one of these other more serious ailments. The other thing that I would like to say too is that it is good to let the immune system rest from time to time. I don't put them on these and then leave them on them forever. I tend to use it in a pulsatile form, meaning put them on it, treat for a period of time, leave them off of it for a period of time, put them back on it for a period of time. And it really just depends on what the situation is and how sick the bird is. Because you are putting them at a little bit of a risk for cytokine storms if the immune system is stimulated too much for too long of a period of time. The caveat to that, I would say, is the lion's mane, because that is mainly, I'm using it for neuronal support. And so those I do dose and continue on long term in the birds with avian virus, as opposed to like if it had lead toxicity, it would only go on it for a period of time until the clinical signs are resolved, and then I would take them back off of it. So that concludes my discussion for you on mushrooms. Thank you for bearing with me through my coughing and my need for the Ricola. And I think we can open it up for questions if Anne wants to come back on and let me know what's been happening in the chat since I haven't been able to pay attention to that.
Absolutely. I think we've all heard the phrase magic mushrooms, but I just want to say you've taught us today that mushrooms are magic. So they have so many incredible properties that
Yeah.
I think they've been overlooked for so long.
And I will say, because you brought up magic mushroom, that I did not in any way touch on psychedelic mushrooms.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. But mushrooms are magic. So this
Yes.
is clear at this point. And I'm sure most of us couldn't begin to grasp the first part of the lecture, all the detail that you have so wisely put together. But all it does is give me confidence that what you now know is based on some incredible science, and the planet survives because of mushrooms. So
Yes.
there's got to be properties that we can put to use with our birds for sure. So, and thanks for the shout out to Gaia, local to us here in Asheville. And they went through some Hurricane Helene trauma, like so many
Yeah. I
here.
love them. I love that company.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the ones you didn't show that I've become a real fan of is, and that you recommended, was the one that's lion's mane and turmeric
Oh,
together.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it has
Yeah,
some,
I couldn't include all of them. I just tried to put some in there because everyone's always like, "Well, what kind do you use?" And
right.
there's
Just
many
tell us
out
what to
there.
do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have the science, you have the foundation. Just want to know how to put it to use at this point. Yeah. So, are there any downsides to mushrooms?
I mean, the thing is you have to take them in pretty high concentrations for there to be downsides. And so in general, I would say no, I have not found any adverse reactions or issues that I'm concerned about. The only thing is, like at the end I said I don't try to use them continuously long term because you can create cytokine storms in them where they're just too overstimulated for too long.
What does
Um,
that mean? Side what you just
so we
said.
talked about the cytokines being like they're inflammatory molecules, and so they just can create this huge inflammatory storm that then overcomes the system with all this inflammation that can be problematic in its own right, whether it's, sudden acute respiratory distress syndrome or things like that.
And when you say not using for a really long time, what give us a sense of what that means? Weeks, days, months?
So usually, like if I'm treating a patient for an illness, I treat for the duration of the illness. Like say I'm using antibiotics, I will use the mushrooms for the same period of time as the antibiotics and often continue them for, a couple weeks after. And depending on what you're treating, that determines how long you're treating for. Like in cases of mycobacterium, you treat for a really long period of time. In cases of aspergillosis, you should treat for a really long period of time. And so those are the ones that I'll put them on the mushroom supplement initially, and then I'll give them a break off of it for a few weeks, and then I'll put them back on it. And that's the pulsatile way that I'll use it.
Mm-hmm. And we didn't really address ganglioneuritis, formerly known as PDD, and not to be confused with coronavirus. But I mean, I found you extremely
Same. Yeah.
helpful. Yeah, and with the ganglioneuritis basically being a nerve
Yes.
issue. And I just want everybody to know I've been following NIH
Yeah.
stuff.
Thank you for saying that so that if people aren't clear on all basically it's the things that affect the nervous system and create the inflammation that these are good for. And yes, ganglioneuritis is.
Right, right. So as I understand it from Dr. Dahlhausen, who's kind of the expert on ganglioneuritis, it's the myelin sheath that's the
Mhm.
issue. And what you helped me learn was that lion's mane is so helpful for that. In fact, there have been some recent NIH studies that show it repairs the myelin sheath. So I mean, there we
Yeah.
go, right? So a lot of people may not even know that their birds might have ganglioneuritis. It can be so dormant or never even be symptomatic, but when it is, it's scary. So anyway, I just want to shout out to you for your help to me with understanding all that, because it's been super helpful. Um, lion's mane, you said, was the only one that is better taken as accruing. The benefits accrue over time
Yeah.
for people as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I really perked up today, hearing this now for the second time. I was able to absorb a little better because it's so much valuable information. But I really perked up when you mentioned wood ear mushroom, because like you say, so many birds, so many people have heart disease or
Yeah.
plaque. And so to decide how much to give your bird, go back to those screens where you put the, is that what you recommend, that they follow your guidance on the dosage?
So you're
I can
kind of
see that.
at the mercy of, like, what these companies put in their products, right? And the concentrations they put in it. It's hard for you to pick up, like, I don't even know if any of these that I put on here had wood's ear in them. Where you're looking at the label and you're looking at the concentrations of what they have in them. Let's see, is wood ear in here? I don't think it is.
I'm thinking that it might be one of the more beneficial mushrooms that we talked about today.
Yeah, I'll tell you how I use it. Is, I buy the dried stuff and I put it in water and I boil it. But keep in mind, we said sometimes you don't want to really overdo it, but I steep it so that I get the broth from that, and then I use that to make stuff for the birds to eat. Right. So I have a Quaker parrot. So I will, cook her some brown rice made with the steeped water from the mushrooms. And I'll include little pieces of the mushrooms in there, but honestly, like, she's not a big fan of, like, picking up the mushroom and eating it. But the fact that I've used the water that was steeped in it, I feel like that is
That's a
helpful.
great idea.
But I think you can also get it in powder form.
Do you, is it bitter? Could we actually make a tea or, water that's, use it as the water base sometimes?
I don't think it's that bitter. I mean, I cook with it all the time,
Mhm.
and put it in my soups and stuff. So I don't find that it's bitter.
Okay. I think that would be one of the best things that people could take away today, because so many birds have that problem. Um, let's see if there's any other questions that, how do you determine the potency and purity of the purchased mushroom extracts?
Yeah, I mean, that's why it gets difficult, because it's not FDA approved. There's not, some of these companies, like My Host Defense, they submit themselves to independent reviews of their products. And so I just have more confidence that they have in them what they say they have in them. And I think the host defense is probably one of the most common, I don't know, the most
Find
common.
it in a lot of
Right. It's
like.
probably the one sold the most in the United States. And
Mhm.
and so with that, you would say if people were having problems with it, they wouldn't keep buying it or using it. Either that or they have a fantastic advertising program, but
Yeah.
I don't think that that's the case. I think it's that there's just a lot of science behind it, and they put a lot of hard work into making these supplements that they think are beneficial.
Um, what do you think about tiger milk mushrooms? I've never heard of those.
I haven't either.
All
I
right.
haven't used that for anything. I'd have to look it up.
And fresh mushrooms, would they be equally beneficial? Well, they wouldn't
So
have
they're
the
definitely beneficial,
fruiting
but
bodies.
well, the mushrooms are the fruiting bodies, right? Like the little cap and the stem and all that. That's where the oh, I know what you're referring to,
I'm
the
saying
little, gotcha,
underground.
and the
Yeah, yeah.
mycelium part. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Correct. That's not going to contain the mycelium and the little babies.
Hmm.
But you would have to eat an awful lot of mushrooms to come up with an equivalent dose to what you're able to get in the supplements. So, although I absolutely cook them and eat them and use them on a regular basis, I still take my mushroom supplements because I feel like I can't eat enough mushroom to get the full benefit that I want.
Uh-huh. Gosh, well, what's the biggest takeaway today that you want people to have?
I guess just not to rely solely on Western medicine, you know, to be
Mhm.
open to the fact that the universe and nature provides us with a lot of natural options that we shouldn't ignore, especially when we're dealing with birds that come from the wild. And, you know, instead of putting chemical stuff into them, if we have options to use other things to support them, I think we should.
Which one have you seen the most effective in terms of treating heart disease or liver disease or respiratory, whatever?
I guess I would say two. I would say lion's mane for sure with ganglionuritis and avian parvovirus, and PDD. But I also have felt really good about using my community. When I have patients that come in that are sick, especially like ones that I put on a course of antibiotics and they don't get better, then I add in other layers at that point, and I feel like that has helped get over the hump and help those patients resolve their issues.
So my community was one of the host defense uh,
Hmm.
options. So
Yep,
you're
it's the one that I have up. Can you see my screen?
yes,
It's the one that I have up there now.
yes, gotcha. So if a bird is sick, in other words, it can't hurt. This is
Yep.
just another nice addition to that,
Hmm.
bolstering the system to recover.
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense. I know I use the powder and I stir it into our mash. That seems to be the most easy way for me to administer.
Hmm.
So, um, somebody had a question about fatty liver disease, which is another so common thing. What was it you recommended? What is the protocol for fatty liver disease?
That was the Japanese mushroom mukitake, this one.
Ah, ah, very good. And so in that case, is it better to be a powder or
Yeah, I think the powder is, I definitely haven't had as much success finding the powder. And because I have lived in New York City, it was easier to get the mushrooms to use.
oh, the actual mushrooms. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like if you could use a powder versus a tincture, that's just a whole lot easier. And if it's easier, you're going to do it. And if it's
Yeah.
hard, you're not going to do it. Right. So, and
I
somebody,
mean, I know that I went through like how to get the alcohol to evaporate, but I'll also tell you on my own birds, I've used the alcohol tincture,
yeah,
you know,
I have to. I
and I
mean,
don't find that they don't get intoxicated. They're not like,
right.
it's not that bad. I
But you're
don't
not using it forever. It's not,
know.
it's like a little bit of salt. It's not bad either.
Yeah.
A little bit of
But
sugar.
some people are very sensitive to that and wouldn't want to do that. So there is a way to sort of get rid of the alcohol if you had the time and the wanted to go through the effort to do it.
Mhm. And I think Animal Essentials does a whole bunch of products. Do you find them, that they have
Hmm.
a lot of good things to offer?
Yes.
Um, before using chaga, which was one of the ones that was little more complicated, well, any mushroom actually, do you recommend doing blood work before and after if you're treating for some kind of illness, just to see the?
I think that that's always ideal if you have an illness to be checking their blood work to see what else is going on. But
Uh-huh.
if I had a situation where it's an 80-year-old woman and she doesn't have the financial resources to be able to run blood work, and I think this bird has atherosclerosis, and I think it's got heart disease, and and it's hypertensive, I wouldn't have any problem just putting it on it without knowing what the blood work is.
And heart disease is one of those things that's like in perpetuity. It's not like an illness you're
Hmm.
recovering from. So does that mean that you should use things like the wood ear more consistently or often?
More consistently, but I still give them a break. I still do it in pulsatile
Gotcha.
fashion.
Okay.
But I also include other things like I end up putting them on omega fatty acids so
Right. Right. Yeah. I do that too. Prevention, hopefully, as a preventative
mhm,
as well as a
yeah.
solution. Yeah. Okay. Wow. Any more questions from anyone? I think we're all like our brains are full
I
and
know. I'm sorry, this lecture runs the gamut of complicated to pretty easy to understand stuff because the audience is always so different. And originally I wrote this for the conference, that the retreat that you had. And so there's veterinarians in there as well as, lay people. And so I tried to kind of pull it all together, but there are complicated parts that
No,
aren't
I
for
think that's
everybody.
great because some people want to understand more detail and others just want to be told what to do. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's all there. And especially at the end, thank you for the dosage information. I know it's not a precise science at this point, but because it is a natural product, like you said, I don't think you don't have to be, it's not like an antibiotic where you really need to be precise. So I think they're going to benefit regardless. So anyway, I think this is just wonderful. Thank you so much. And I know that it's going to be invaluable for people from here on out. We'll put the recording up on our website. Everybody knows how to find that. And somebody mentioned what a beautiful presentation. I agree. I love your
Oh,
slide.
thank you. Thank you very
Laid them
much.
out. It's very elegant and informative. So it's very nice. Anyway, well, big shout out to Dr. Brown for all her enormous research on this. And hopefully you'll continue to practice this and give us updates down the road about what you've learned about different mushrooms having different benefits, because, we're always going to need help. Our birds are always going to need help, especially captivity where they don't get so much of what they need, like exercise and
Yeah.
etc. All right. Well, thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Hope to see
Bye.
everybody December 7th. Don't forget, it's a live event, live Q&A. So it's really better if you could join us, and we hope you will. Meanwhile, thanks again, and I'll see you next month.
All right. Sounds good.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.